Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Bill Brenner, VP of Content Strategy at Cyber Risk Alliance and Security Weekly, and I hope everybody who is here is enjoying day one of RSA Conference 2023. I'm very pleased to be sitting here with Vinay Anand, Chief Product Officer at NetSPI. Welcome.
Thanks, Bill. How are you?
I'm doing well. How about you?
Doing very well. Looking forward to the show.
So, NetSPI is all about, not just all about, but EASM, External Attack Surface Management. And this is a topic, a line of technology that still isn't quite as understood as it could be. So start by breaking that down to me. Talk about what External Attack Surface Management is, what the goal is, how it works.
Yeah, sure. So NetSPI is a leader in offensive security and pen testing. So offensive security means looking at your entire IT estate and detecting where you are exposed, from outside, from inside, all over. From outside the network, from inside applications, mobile vulnerabilities, IoT. We look at every part of your attack surface. And we use a combination of automation, tools, platforms, and pen testing. So we bring it all together to detect areas where you're exposed and also detect what the risk is and how important is that exposure. So that is the kind of the big picture. Now coming to ASM, or attack surface management, this is a relatively new concept. The concept's been around, but in terms of products and presence in the market, it's only in the last few years that you've seen products come out into the market. Today we are calling it EASM, External Attack Surface Management. Started as ASM. And the basic premise here is you build scanners and automation to probe your network to detect where you're exposed. And when you do it from outside your boundaries, you start identifying all the assets in your network that are exposed to the internet. That is the basic premise it started with. And as the technology matured and people started getting comfortable with it, it started branching into external and internal. So there's this concept called EASM, External Attack Surface Management. You also have something called Chasm, Continuous Cyber Asset Attack Surface Management, which is more of an internal thing. But the premise here is you probe every asset to detect which ones are exposed. And then you detect what is exposed. Is it a port that's exposed? Are secret keys exposed? At the app level or the protocol level? So you go up and down the stack, and then you look at a holistic approach to that particular asset, if it's a server or a EC2 instance or whatever else. And then you identify which areas are exposed. So that is the basic premise. And then you build technology on top of it for a qualitative assessment of what you found.
Now, as customers and prospective customers are coming to you to talk about external attack surface management, what are some of the pain points that are coming to you with looking for help, and tie that back into what you've just described in terms of what EASM is?
Yeah. So at a basic level, customers really are largely blind to what assets are exposed to the internet. Let's start from there. Some of them are intentional. You expose a server because people outside your network needs to access it. It's either an e-commerce server or your partners have to access it for various reasons. You have a web server, etc. Oftentimes, you also expose assets because they're misconfigured out of mistake, and that is a risk to your security. At other times, there's also shadow IT, where people, usually in the development side or testing, bring up assets, bring up servers, they're doing something with it which is not necessarily approved or signed off by InfoSec, and that might end up being exposed because it's not configured according to your security policies, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a combination of things that are intentional, you want to have them visible outside, things that are misconfigured, or things that are just shadow IT. Customers don't have a holistic view of all of this. So the first thing they want to do is look at my estate and tell me what is exposed. And then we'll figure out how much of these is approved and how much of this is not approved. It starts from there. And then you look at vulnerabilities on each of these things that are exposed. Some assets may be exposed, but they may be harmless because they're so rock solid. There's no vulnerability. You can't do anything with it. But in some other cases, there are vulnerabilities associated with those assets, which make them high risk. And then, depending on how sophisticated the vendor is, for instance, we are able to connect those exposed assets to other internal assets that are connected to it. And they could potentially be at risk because you have a door open.
Mm-hmm.
So you can take it forward to the next level and say, okay, we found all the assets that are exposed, out of which, let's say, 10 of them are not approved or danger to your environment. Out of those, there are 4 that are connected. There's a path to other more important assets inside your network. And this poses a bigger risk to you. And that is the entire journey that customers want. But most of the tools today, the automation, don't go that far because that context is missing. You can throw up a bunch of scanners and you can throw up a lot of information that says so many assets are exposed. But the qualitative assessment that goes in, which says out of these which are really vulnerable, which are not vulnerable,
Mm-hmm.
and of those that have vulnerability associated with it, which of them actually expose real deep internal assets and which don't. For that, you need much deeper analysis. So what we do is we pair automation with manual pen testing. And these are very well-trained expert pen testers, deep in understanding of penetration testing and threats. They understand the company concept, the business context around this for each company. They're able to separate the signal from the noise. So we can generate a lot of noise, of course, like any automation. And then we separate signal from noise and we pare it down and say, out of everything we found, there are only 4 things you should really care about. That is the premise of what customers are looking for.
So there's the triage.
It's a triage
Yep.
between automation, business context, deep testing, and understanding the net impact of the exposure. Not just that asset A is exposed,
Yep.
but what could that lead to?
Now, as is the case with any newer technology, where we've seen it over and over again, where a company is trying to correct their blind spots and they go in to buy a product like this, but they're not always asking all the right questions first to get a sense of how it needs to work in their environment and how you would help them once deployed.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about some of the key questions. If somebody comes to NetSPI to talk about your what you offer, what are some of the key questions you think they need to be asking so that you can better help them get to where they need to be?
So I think most customers know what they want. They may not know how to ask for it. The basic premise everyone starts with is, I want to understand where I'm exposed and what my risk is. That's how it starts, and that is true. But then as you engage with the vendors, you realize if you don't ask the right questions, you get a lot of noise. You get a lot of data. Data is not information. You get a lot of data that's not triaged, as you said, or not correlated. You don't overlay business context with it. You don't overlay vulnerabilities and other things. So the questions customers should really ask is not just what am I exposed to, but what is the net effect? What is the impact of that exposure? Tell me what assets are exposed, but also tell me what is the impact of that exposure. Where am I at risk and how high is that risk for each asset? Quantifying that risk and the exposure is very important. And I think that's a journey the industry is going through now.
Yeah, thank you for that. So every year at RSA, the question comes up, what's the big talking point? Where is the hype? For better or worse, this year, it's artificial intelligence. So the risks of generative AI, but also the benefits of artificial intelligence and how different security products use them. Talk about it in the context of EASM and what NetSPI does.
Yeah. So this is an interesting topic, and I'm sure over the next 2 days we are going to hear a ton about AI and LLMs. So let's first be clear on what generative AI or LLMs do for us.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, they're able to parse a huge amount of data, find the connections between them, and allow us to, in natural language, ask questions and get qualitative answers. Before this, what would happen is we'd build very sophisticated ML and rules where we say if A connects to B connects to C, and if this is the overlay, and if this is the context, et cetera, then we throw an output. Now with LLMs, the system will absorb a lot of this data, create its own correlations, and give out very intelligent assessment on what it is. That is the core intent of using LLMs or generative AI in this context. So what you need for this, you first need a large amount of data, and you need data that requires a lot of correlation and context. And if you deliver all of that to a solidly trained LLM model, you can ask these questions. So in the context of EASM, if you do the right things with, let's say, LLMs, you could ask the question, tell me all the assets that are exposed to the internet. And it would tell you that. In a pre-LLM world, we would generate a report. We would do the same thing. We would write queries to the database. And there'll be very sophisticated queries. But you can take it further and say, of all these assets, tell me which ones are high risk. And the system will automatically tell you that. Then you can ask, of all the high risk assets, which ones are connected to my databases or data stores? Or which ones are connected to my PII information? Or how much risk is there to my core servers or crown jewels because of this exposure? The system is supposed to churn all that data and tell you in a qualitative fashion what is happening. Now, without LLMs, you do the same thing, but it's a lot of modeling and correlation. So the industry has been on this journey for a long time. It's not like suddenly this came out of nowhere. The concept of generative AI is probably new to the world, but the outcomes, the use cases, the problems we're trying to solve, we've all been working on it for a long time.
Yeah.
This just makes it easier to deliver more natural language-like answers rather than go into reports and dashboards and charts and graphs.
Now, are you on the exhibit floor?
Of course we are.
Do you know the booth number off the top of your head?
No, but I know where it is.
North, south, central?
We are in the north side.
All right. So the North Expo Hall, check them out.
Yeah, please come and visit us. A lot of interesting innovation around offensive security, attack simulation, external attack management, ASM, a lot of pen testing around every aspect of your attack surface and of your IT estate. So deep technology, a lot of interesting stuff there. Do stop by.
Well, it's been a pleasure. Have a great week.
Thanks, Bill. Take care.